So, in my opinion is right on this one, just so you can hear the humility right out of the gate. When you are talking about top 5 movies, there is a particular movie that has to be on that list. Whatever your list is, this movie needs to make it. Anybody want to give a guess on what that movie is? Citizen Kane. We're not that sophisticated. That's great. It's a great movie. That's not where I'm going. Forrest Gump. Okay, first of all right, hold on. Top Gun, you are a church after my own heart. Thank you for that. But that's not where I'm going. Citizen Kane, Top Gun, that's great. Somebody said it right over here and it starts with a B. Braveheart. Like Braveheart. And did somebody groan at Braveheart? This is not gonna go well. Okay, all right. So if you haven't seen it, I'm not really concerned about spoilers because you've had 30 years to see it. So it's partially true story. It's a portrayal of the true story of the Scottish people, Scotland, fighting against the English. See, I'm rattled that somebody would grunt at Braveheart. This got me thrown off. So Scotland is fighting England. Scotland was ruled by the English. They were brutal, they were ruthless. Basically, the English took whatever they wanted and they killed anybody in their way. They were ruthless. Scotland didn't know freedom. All they knew was oppression. Then this guy, William Wallace, comes along. And William Wallace just kind of wants to go underneath the radar. He's got no aspirations of leadership or being a warrior. He just wants to kind of live his life. Then all of that changes when the English kill his wife. Like, don't mess with a man's wife. So Wallace becomes the de facto leader of the Scots as they fight against the English. He really becomes the visionary force, freedom in Scotland. He starts talking about freedom all the time. He really gives these incredible, grandiose speeches on the battlefield. He's got his face painted blue. It's awesome. And he really starts talking to the men in a way they've never heard anybody speak before. He starts calling on the men to be men. He tells them, hey, stand up and fight for your wives, fight for your kids, fight for your land, stand up and fight against anything that's gonna try to steal, kill, and destroy that. And I can't speak for the ladies, but guys, like that kind of stuff fires us up, doesn't it? Like to stand up and fight for your wife, to fight for your kids, to fight for what's right and stand against any kind of tyranny or evil, that fires us up. And it did with the Scots also. They got fired up. Wallace was able to unify this really disunified people group that had been beaten into submission for so long, and he rallies them to fight against one of the greatest armies on the planet. And at first, he gets a lot of resistance. Not from the English, but from his own people. They're like, whoa, pause. You can't fight the English. You can't do that. All this freedom, our own country talk, we gotta stop that. He's like, what are you talking about? I thought this is what we wanted. We could actually have this. What do you mean? And they're like, if you fight against the English, you won't win. You'll get killed, and so will everybody that follows you into battle. If you stand up against the English, you will die. And then Wallace says, in my opinion, the best line in the movie. He says, every man dies. Not every man lives. What he's saying is, I'm not worried about dying. I'm worried about not living. And right now, we're not living, and we never will as long as we're under this kind of oppression. Every man dies, but not every man really lives. That's so good, isn't it? And there's a profound truth in that line too. Now sure, 100% of people die. Like, I hate to break that to you, the mortality rate is 100%. But what's tragic about that is not death. Death is not the tragic part. What's tragic is that there are so many people that go through this life and they never really live. It's people living a dead life. What's even more tragic is that so many people today buy into this bankrupt idea that since everyone dies, the way to actually live is to be as self-indulgent as you possibly can, because the clock's ticking. So if the clock's ticking, if you want to actually live, man, then you do you. Whatever feels good to you in the moment, do that. That's what'll give you life. Whatever truth is to you in this moment, that's your truth. What you're told is the way to actually experience life is to do the things that make you feel, keyword feel, alive. It's self-focus, self-satisfaction, self-promotion. The problem is that stuff doesn't lead to life. If you buy into that bankrupt idea, what that actually does is it tricks you into believing that you are actually living until one day when your time runs out, you have this horrific realization that you never actually lived. and the only thing you have now in front of you is death. That's one of the greatest tragedies that's playing out every single day in our world. Every man dies. Not every man really lives. Unfortunately, that line is true. But it actually can be false too. Everyone dies, here's the asterisk, except the people who will respond to the call of Jesus. Seriously, let me show you. Today's really part 2 of what we started last week. We're in John 11, and what's going on is there's this family that Jesus is super close to. They're really good friends, this family with Jesus. There's 2 sisters, Mary and Martha, and then they have a brother named Lazarus. And Jesus had just gotten out of Dodge because there's people that are trying to stone him to death for claiming to be God, so he takes off. And while he's gone, Lazarus, his really close friend, he gets sick, and it's bad. So Mary and Martha, they send word to Jesus telling him, hey, your boy Lazarus, he might not make it, thinking that if Jesus knows about it, he's gonna come back and take care of the situation, but Jesus delays. He says, hey, Lazarus' sickness, it's for the glory of God. And he just waits. And after a few days, he says, okay, now let's go. But it was too late. Lazarus had died and Jesus wasn't there. And when he gets back closer to their house, Martha comes out to meet him and she lets him know about it. She says, Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Which is a pretty understandable statement, right? I mean, have you ever been in that spot before? God, if you would have been here, then fill in the blank, this would have never happened. But as hard as that may seem, and maybe we just don't even want to accept this, sometimes shaping is more important than saving. And that's what Jesus is doing right here. And there's this huge group of people that are about to find out that Jesus is the personal God that brings people to life through his glory, even in the midst of a mess or suffering. That's what they're all gonna find out. But how? Because Lazarus is already dead and death is final, right? Hear me on this. If you believe that physical death is final, if that's what you believe, that physical death is final, then you will live a self-focused life, because why wouldn't you? The clock's ticking, I better live as much as I can. Like, even if you're saying, no, man, I'm part of this cause, I'm helping these people, I'm doing these really just philanthropic, I can't even say that word today. I'm just doing these really empathetic things. It's like, no, I'm not living for myself. Well, yeah, you are if death is final, because even though you might be doing good things and you might care about them, really at the core, is that just so you feel better about yourself? So that I can feel good about me and the time that I have. It's a self-focused life if you believe that death is final. But death is not final. If you think it's final, you're just gonna be one of those people that doesn't actually live, and then you find out at the end of your days, man, I never lived, and I got nothing except death. Death is real, absolutely it is. It's not final. This is true. And it should be the perspective that we live with daily. So Jesus goes out and he meets Martha, and she's understandably upset. Here's what she says. Here's what Jesus says to her. Verse 25, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Physical death isn't final. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this, Martha? Yeah, Lord, she told him. I've always believed you are the Messiah. You are the Son of God, the one who's come into this world from God. And she returned to Mary, and she called Mary aside from the mourners, and she told her, hey, the teacher's here and he wants to see you. So Mary immediately went out to him, and Jesus stayed outside the village at the place where Martha had met him. And when the people who were at the house consoling Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed she's going to Lazarus' grave to weep. So they followed her there. And when Mary arrived and she saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother wouldn't have died. I've heard that before. And when Jesus saw her weeping and he saw all the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up with him, and he was deeply troubled. Where have you put him, he asked them. They told him, Lord, come and see. Then Jesus wept. Now, Jesus is both fully God and fully man. Right here is one of the clearest pictures of his humanity. He's weeping. The Son of God is crying. Why is he weeping? Why is he crying? Is it because he's experiencing the effects of death? I mean, one of his closest friends just died. Is that why he's crying? I mean, you would cry too if one of your closest friends died, wouldn't you? Some of you have experienced that before. Some of you know exactly how Jesus feels right here. You can empathize with him. Or is he weeping because he's weeping with those who weep, like Romans 12 says? He's trying to be empathetic. Or is he weeping because death isn't a part of the original design? Is that why? Or is he weeping because of all the people who live or are living but will never actually live? People that buy into this bankrupt idea that the only way to live in this life is to get as much out of it for yourself as you can. Then they're gonna look back one day and realize I never really lived. People that are living a dead life. Is that what he's weeping for? Or maybe the reason is all the above. Hear me on this. This is something I can promise you. The pain you feel and the pain you experience, your God feels it too. In fact, when you are in pain, that's one of the times when Jesus wants you with him the most. You're gonna experience pain. You're gonna suffer. You already have, and it will happen again. Just know this, that the one true God is a personal God who's experienced pain and suffering himself, so he knows exactly how you feel. That means your tears have a voice in the ears of Jesus. They just do. Sometimes tears are the best words, the most impactful words. And there is no one who hears and understands those words better than Jesus. This is where perspective is really important. In Revelation, God says that every suffering, every sorrow will be turned into joy. So if you've been here, I read this verse a lot, and I'm always gonna point you back to this verse because I want this promise to be in front of you. I want this promise to shape your perspective. It's Revelation 21:4. It says, he, meaning Jesus, will wipe away every tear from their eyes. And there will be no more death, nor more sorrow, nor crying, nor pain. All these are gone forever. That's a great promise to hold on to. Okay, cool, Matt. Like that's great. That's a future promise, right? Yeah, it's a future promise. Okay, well, what about right now? Like, what about the pain I'm in right now? What about the pain that happened yesterday? What about the stuff 5 years ago? What about that? It's a great question. It's exactly what Mary and Martha are saying. Hey, Jesus, if you would have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. If you would have been here, these tears wouldn't be. I mean, it's cool that you're weeping with us, Jesus. From Mary's perspective, she's kind of like, yeah, I appreciate the empathy. That's great that you're crying with us. But hey, you're just entering into the sadness that you could have prevented. So why didn't you? Why didn't you prevent all this? Why didn't you prevent death? Why don't you prevent cancer? Why don't you prevent divorce? Why don't you prevent betrayal? Why don't you prevent all the hurt and the adversity that we will experience in life? It's a very fair question. Don't be afraid to ask that question. But sometimes shaping is more important than saving. And maybe we don't like to hear it. I don't like to. I'm the one saying it, and I want to just like slap myself. It's not a fun thing to hear. It's not the answer I want to hear. Maybe you're better than me and more mature than me. I don't want to hear that. But genuine faith is much, much more valuable than us being saved or prevented from or taken out of all kinds of painful situations, any kind of painful situation we might come across, because if genuine faith is so valuable, this was last week, if genuine faith is so valuable, then it's more important than the pain we might experience in the fire. And genuine faith is only shaped, it's only forged in the fire. And again, maybe that makes you mad to hear that. Maybe you're mad at God because he didn't prevent this suffering that you experienced whenever it was in the past. Maybe you're mad at him because he's not going to prevent some suffering you will experience in the future. Jesus is mad too, though. It says a deep anger welled up in him. And what are you mad about? You're the Son of God. What are you mad about? What's he mad about? He's mad at death. That's what he's mad at. Not just because his close friends are experiencing pain from it, not just because of all the mourners that came to see Lazarus and go to his grave, but he's mad at death because of what it's done to you and the pain you've experienced from death, the pain that everybody in this room and everybody online has experienced at some point. The death of a friend, the death of a spouse, the death of a child, The New Testament's originally written in Greek. The Greek word here for anger can actually be translated also to mean indignant. Indignant meaning upset with or annoyed at the perceived mistreatment of something. So a way we could actually read this is that Jesus is mad at death because he views it as unfair mistreatments. That's what indignant means here. You can relate with that, can't you? Man, when Kelly's sister died in 2020, it felt so unfair. She's a 40-year-old who's completely healthy, gets a kind of cancer that you don't get at 40 years old. She lives 2 years, which was way longer than she should have. The only reason she lived that long is because she was young and healthy, which just meant more pain and suffering, and then she still dies with a husband and 2 small girls. I remember, man, I don't know when it was. It was probably 6 months after she passed, and Kelly and I were talking about it. Kelly's sister, that was her best friend. They had the kind of relationship that I hope my kids have with each other when they're adults. I remember Kelly said to me one day, she said, I trust God. She's in tears. She said, I trust God, but this is so unfair. Anybody in here, raise your hand if you've ever experienced death and it felt unfair. Raise your hand and keep them up. Now look around the room. A lot of people that have experienced the unfair pain from death, that's what Jesus is mad about. And if you have your hand up, if you had your hand up, he knows exactly how you feel. He's mad at death because it's unfair, even though it's guaranteed. Like you're physically gonna die. We all will. But the reason why Jesus is mad at this reality is because it was never part of the plan. Death is real, but it was never supposed to be here. When sin broke the world, that opened the door for death. Death exists because of sin. The problem is you and I can do nothing to change that. We can't. But Jesus can. He says, I'm the resurrection and the life, meaning I am the source of life. I alone have power over death. And he's about to prove it. Here's what he says. Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb. A cave with a stone rolled across the entrance. He said, roll the stone aside. But Martha, the dead man's sister, protested. Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Jesus responded, didn't I tell you you would see God's glory if you believe? So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and he starts praying to God the Father. Father, thank you for hearing me. You always hear me, but I said this out loud for the sake of all these people standing here so that they would believe you sent me. Then he shouted, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in grave cloths, his face wrapped with a headcloth. Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. And many people who were with Mary believed in Jesus when they saw this happen. This is what Jesus does. He makes dead things come to life. That's as simple as I can say it. And now you've got to do something with this. He just told a dead guy that he's not allowed to be dead anymore. He said, I am the resurrection, and then he resurrects a guy out of his own grave. Like you've got to decide, every single person in here, you've got to decide whether this is true or not. If it's not, if this didn't happen, and our reason and our experience will tell us that this didn't happen. Like, I don't know about you, but I have not seen someone alive after they have been dead for 4 days. I have not seen that happen. If this didn't happen, then Jesus is just some crazy guy with a God complex, and we, meaning Christians, we are fools for falling for it. We're fools for believing in it. But if this did happen, that changes everything. I mean, there's plenty of people right here that were eyewitnesses and saw this happen. Not to mention the hundreds of people that saw Jesus after he resurrected himself. What if this didn't happen? If Jesus himself didn't rise from the grave, go back to his resurrection. If he didn't rise from the grave, then you and I would have never heard this story. If Jesus himself didn't rise from the dead, we would have never heard about Lazarus. Because that means Jesus wasn't the resurrection, meaning he doesn't have power over death like he says he does, which means he couldn't resurrect Lazarus. We would have never heard of him. On top of that, the people that were alive when John and the other 3 gospels were being circulated, most of them were alive when these stories took place. That means if this was all a lie, if this was a big trick, those people would have called it all out. When they heard about it, when they read about it, they would have called that out. That didn't actually happen. This is a joke. If this didn't really happen, this story wouldn't have lasted 2,000 years if it was a hoax. If Jesus himself didn't rise from the dead, then he couldn't have raised Lazarus. But if Jesus did rise from the dead, then why wouldn't he be able to raise Lazarus? So what do you do with this? You respond to it. If this is your first time ever hearing this, if you would say, no, man, I'm not a Christian, I'm just here because I decided to show up, try this out. Somebody just keeps asking me to come, so I thought I'd come. And you can respond to this now. Even if you're a Christ follower, you've been following Jesus for decades, respond to this. Man, it says that Jesus shouted at Lazarus. The gospel message is a loud call to you. It's a call that you need to and you get to respond to. It's a call to life, real, authentic, eternal life, new life. It's a call to purpose. It's a call to meaning. It's a call to be a part of a story. It's a call to experience God's glory. The glory of God is bringing dead things to life. That's why Jesus said, no, Lazarus' sickness, it's not gonna end in death. This all happened for God's glory. That means whatever's going on with you, sickness, pain, suffering, rocky marriage, depression, habitual sin, lack of meaning and purpose, whatever's going on with you, if you respond to Jesus, none of that ends in death. None of it does. And on top of that, the response to Jesus is not just physical resurrection on the last day for eternal life, which is going to happen, but it also means resurrection in life right now. For you, maybe that's resurrection and new life in your marriage. Maybe your marriage is rocky right now. Jesus can bring life to that. He can bring life to a dying or dead marriage. But that means, hey, maybe I gotta confess some stuff to my spouse. Maybe we both need to ask for forgiveness. It definitely will mean you dying to yourself so that you can follow Christ and put your spouse above yourself. But he can absolutely bring life to your marriage. Or maybe it's purpose. Maybe you're just in that spot where you're like, man, I don't know. Like, what purpose do I actually have? What's the meaning to all of this? My purpose, I feel like I knew what it was, but now it's dead. And he can bring resurrection and life to that too also. Here's the truth. You were created on purpose for purpose. But what this world will do and what a dead life will do is it will rob you of your God-given purpose. But Jesus can bring life to that purpose too. Or maybe it's your suffering. Man, God will use present suffering to shape you. That was last week. But he will also resurrect past suffering. Maybe that sounds kind of scary. Here's what I mean. If you've ever experienced something like abandonment or abuse, could be physical, could be sexual, any kind of stuff like that. I'm just throwing those out as examples. Any kind of suffering in the past, that can feel like you're still in a grave with it, can't it? You know, maybe sometimes you feel like you're the only one. Man, I'm the only one that's experienced this. I feel so alone. Maybe you feel like you're weak because you still struggle with the pain of it. And it's never quite healed to a scar, but it's still a little bit of an open wound. Maybe you feel like, man, I should be ashamed of this that I experienced. Or maybe it's still the what ifs that come with it that scare you. Past suffering feels like a tomb. The call of Jesus is for you to come out of that tomb and into healing. And on top of that, he'll bring life to it. Like, here's what I mean. God will put people in your life that are going through the exact same thing that you suffered through. And he will use what happened with you, something that feels like death to you, to give life to somebody else. Maybe you haven't even met him yet, but you can walk alongside him and say, you know what, man, I've been there before. I know exactly how you feel. No, you're not crazy. No, you're not alone. Hey, can I give you some counsel, some advice of what really helped me in this spot? And you'll be able to walk with them. That will give you so much life to do that. And honestly, what you'll actually do, this might sound crazy, is you'll be grateful. God, thank you for taking something that was so meaningless and giving it meaning. Thank you for taking something that was so harmful to me and allowing me to use that to help somebody else. That will just give you new life. God will bring life even to past sufferings. Like whatever it is, that thing in the back of your mind right now, the thing that you're thinking about in your mind right now, he can resurrect that and give it life. Well, Matt, I don't know, that's pretty messy. And I just think it would be better if we just avoided it. It'd be a lot easier to avoid that. I mean, I get that. Like, we've all got a mess. Can we just be real about that? Like every single one of us has a mess right now or in the past. We can just be real, that's true. But this is a safe place where you can bring that mess. This is also a strong place to allow Jesus to confront that, to change it. Because you don't want that mess to just still be true and still have control over you. Jesus will say, I'll take that. Man, that can happen here. But so often we're like, I don't know. This is kind of scary. This will get messy. It'll start to smell. We could just avoid this because maybe you're embarrassed by it, or maybe you're afraid of what people will think about you, or maybe you don't want to bother other people with you. So Jesus, this is just going to be a little too messy, so can we just not touch this one? It's exactly what Mary and Martha are saying. He's been dead for 4 days. The smell will be terrible. Like we do the same thing. We say we believe, just like Martha said she believes. We say that we want to see God's glory, but then when it starts to happen, why do we so easily question it? Like, God, hold up, what are you doing? I don't know, is that the best approach? Jesus, do you really want to do it that way? That's gonna get messy. It's probably gonna smell. I don't know, why do we do that? We say we want to see his glory, but then when we start to question it when it happens. Is it because we just want it our own way? Man, I'm cool with God's glory. I just want it on my terms. Or are we afraid of the mess? Are we afraid of what might happen, how it might hurt, how it might expose us? Or are we afraid that it's gonna smell? Hear me on this. Sometimes God's glory has to work in your mess, in the dead things that you have. And when he does that, it's gonna stir some stuff up that might smell. But what's better? Like, isn't it better to live with the smell of dead things that are starting to come back to life? Isn't that better than living a dead life? You wanna know how to tell if you're living a dead life? You are living a dead life if the things you live for die with you. If what your life is about, what you're pursuing, what you're living for, if that dies with you, then you're living a dead life. Could be things like prosperity, money. Can't take it with you. Well, I know, Matt, I can't take it with me, but I'm saving up so I can pass on an inheritance to my kids. Okay, that's great. But even if you pass it on, 70% of generational wealth doesn't make it past the second generation. 90% doesn't make it past the third. That means, best case scenario, your money is gone with your kids or your grandkids. It dies with you. Or maybe it's a vacation home. Nothing wrong with that. Honestly, I would love to have a cabin in the mountains. I would love that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if that's what you're living for, here's the truth. One day somebody else is gonna buy it. And then a day after that, eventually it's getting torn down to have something else built on top of it. Or your stuff. Everything that you own, clothes, furniture, house, cars, toys, everything that you own, here's the real truth. One day, every single piece of material that you own is gonna end up in a garage sale or a landfill. Just will. If that's what you're living for, it dies with you. Or if you're living for a career. Careers are great, they're a gift, but it will die with you. Well, wait, man, I'm building this company and it's gonna keep going after I'm gone. It might, for a while. But they're gonna start the process to replace you the day after you're gone. Nobody's building a statue of you. Nobody's gonna keep your parking space roped off. Somebody else is getting it. Or maybe you're living for social movements. This is a really popular one today. And there's all kinds of social movements out there today that you can live for, but they're all almost always entirely for specific groups of people. And whenever a social movement is usually for a specific group of people, this isn't all the time, but most of the time today, when it's for a specific group of people, it's not for that group of people, it's using that group of people as a facade to do something for the individual. A big social movement is for everyone. If it's about everyone, then it's for everyone. Like, go back to the 60s with the civil rights movement. That was for minorities, but that was for everyone. That was for that group of people. Almost all of the stuff we see today is just a facade to take care of individual wants. Almost every single social movement today that you are asked and encouraged and even tried to have your arm twisted to join, almost all of them are meant to reinforce the lie from Genesis 3 that you can be your own God. So when you hear things like, hey, you do you, what feels good to you is right, you are your own God. Hey, whatever truth is to you, that's what truth is. Isn't it about time? Whenever you hear those are just slogans to start another movement to reinforce the lie from Genesis 3 that you are your own God. So if at the core, something you're living for, like a movement like that, at its core is meant to make you your own God, then it will die with you because one day you are physically going to die. Like whatever it is for you, you're living a dead life if what you're living for dies with you. So let me ask you, like, what are you really living for? I mean, do we really know that? Do we take the time to reflect on that? I gotta ask myself that question. Man, am I really living for Jesus today? This is a daily conversation I have to have with myself. Am I really living for Jesus today? Am I really living for my family? Am I really living for you guys as your pastor? Or am I being about me? And I hate to say this, but man, there's times where I'm about me. I'm not strong enough yet, but I'm gonna keep living into it and leaning into it. What are you really living for? Is it about you or is it about Jesus? Galatians 2:20 says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who died for me. Quote that verse back to yourself every single day. What are you really living for? What have you really responded to? Have you responded to the calls on social media? Have you responded to the calls in our culture? Or you responded to the gospel? I am the resurrection and the life. That means the only way to live a life that doesn't die with you is to be attached to the things of Jesus. That's it. If you want to live a life now that you're actually living and not look back at the end of your days and like, man, I missed it. I didn't really live. If you want to live a life that actually keeps going after you're physically gone before Jesus comes back and you get physically resurrected, the only way to do that is to be attached to Jesus and the things that Jesus is about. Is that exclusive? Absolutely it is. Is it inclusive? Yep, because it's for everyone. But for everyone means everyone has to die to themselves, their own wants, their own opinions, their own preferences to say, you know what, I'm not Lord and Savior. Jesus says I'm gonna follow him. Then it's for everyone. That's pretty awesome. But do we know what we've really responded to? If you want to live a life that actually matters, respond to Christ, not everything out there. Follow him, be attached to what he's attached to. Let your life be about as introducing as many people as you possibly can to Jesus. Live for your family, and not just for your family's worldly prosperity. That's usually what we do. Let me try to save up as much money as I can for an inheritance for my kids, my grandkids. Let me try to save for college. Let me try to get a trainer for my kids so they get a scholarship. Let me give them the stuff that I never had. All of that's fine. That's great. And there's actually a lot of joy in that. Proverbs actually talks about a wise man saves up an inheritance for his children's children. There's wisdom in that, but usually we stop with worldly prosperity for our family. That will all die with them. Instead, live for the spiritual prosperity of your family. And guys, men specifically, let me talk to you, starts with us. Like right now, I'm gonna talk to the men for a second. Right now, you are told that no matter what, as a man, you are wrong. That masculinity is a bad thing, that we need men to sit down and be quiet, that everything wrong in the world starts with men. Can I just tell you, guys, you're gonna hear that every day. That's a lie from the pit of hell. And when men be quiet and sit down and become passive and don't stand up and don't live out the God-given role that he's called you to, you know who suffers the most? Women and kids. They're the ones that get hurt the most. Man, we've been called to step up, to stand up against an enemy who's trying to steal, kill, and destroy everything out from underneath us. It starts with our marriages and our kids. The things that our kids are getting attacked with today, good grief, man, I feel like I didn't graduate high school that long ago, but it seems like an eternity now. Like the stuff that my kids face, I never had to face that in high school or middle school, and you parents, you know what I'm talking about, right? Man, the world's gonna go after our kids, and guys, it's time for us to step up for that. When you step up as a man, it doesn't mean you are better than anybody else. It doesn't mean you're better than women or kids. In fact, when you step up as a man, it means you're actually lowering yourself below your wife or below your kids. I'm gonna serve them, I'm gonna protect them, I'm gonna lead them so that they thrive. And right now we need men to be men. We just do. Every man dies. You don't have to. Jesus resurrected Lazarus. He told him to walk out of his own grave. He can do that with you too. Not every man really lives. You can. That's not just for men, that's women and kids too. You can live if you're attached to Jesus, if you're responding to him, if your life is pursuing him, not yourself. So what are you really pursuing? What's your life really about? Have you responded to this call? I'm the resurrection and life. Follow him and watch the life that he will give in you, what he'll bring through you, what he'll do in you, and what will happen to other people around you and how they'll be blessed. If you're tracking with Christ, and there's days where it's hard and you fall down and you screw up, that's what forgiveness and repentance and grace are for. But man, the more you chase after Jesus, I'm gonna take one step forward today. I'm gonna be a little bit more like him today than I was yesterday and let him transform you. My goodness, the people that are closest to you will be the ones that are blessed the most. Go back to men, that's your wives and your kids. So who are you responding to? Who are you following? Go after him and watch the life he'll give you. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for being a God who is a God over death, that we don't have to fear it, that you've proven that you have power over death. You rose your friend. If you rose your friend Lazarus from the dead, man, I have great hope, because later in John, you say that if we follow you, you call us friends now. So you're gonna raise us too. Not only on the last day, but would you just raise us now? Would you bring new life into our marriages, into our friendships, into our office space, into our homes, into our parenting, into our friendships? Would you bring new life in our church? Would you let resurrection and revival happen here at LifeBridge and let that just spread all over Northern Colorado? Use us for your glory. Use our suffering, our sickness, our mess, our smell for your glory. Would you just let us see it? We love you. It's in your name. Amen.